Okay, so anyways, I think it's just me and Moving, right? Uh,
Yes,
so
it's just two of us now.
yeah, let me share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I guess it's widescreen for now.
Yeah,
I can
that's
see it.
okay. So agenda for today's session is, like I mentioned, it's introduction to binary systems. Then we'll be looking at programming constants, constructs. Moin, have you decided on any language up till now? Like, which language would you continue with?
I guess for now I will be going with JavaScript.
So, have you started on your own, like learning JavaScript?
Yeah, I've been trying to learn actually with that Indianic account which Arpit shared to me.
Oh, great. Okay. So, can you tell me like on what topic you are currently in your curriculum?
Basics. I learned and then forgot some. I went till 80 lectures there. There are five more than 500. So I reached till 80 85. But I don't remember much of it now.
Okay, no worries, man. Today's session is just the introductory session. So, if you have any doubts, I think relating to these topics, we would cover all of that. Uh,
Okay.
and then operators finally. Okay, in the last uh, session, do you have any doubts in the last session? Did you go through the sources that I
Yes.
shared?
Not all of them, but what you taught last time, the time complexity, the use of the logarithmic function, and how we are supposed to use that. Actually,
Yeah.
I've gone through that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, man. So I think let's just start with the binary systems. Okay, so binary systems is basically like it's a number system. Like we as humans, we tend to use the decimal system, right? So binary system is
Right.
the number system that computers tend to understand better. We would look like why do computers use binary systems uh, instead of decimal systems? So if you can recall, like in the last session, we made this small diagram, right? Like we have some
Uh,
inputs, and then the inputs go through some algorithm
Algorithm.
or program, whatever you can call it, right? And then we get our desired output, right? So, like, if I have to ask you what this input is, so like, what is the most fundamental input that we can provide a computer? What would you answer?
So I guess it would be 0 1, the binary numbers. Right.
No, no, that's
In
not
the
the
end,
input that we like.
okay.
A physical input, like, what do you think? If today you have to build a computer from scratch, what's the most fundamental input that you would provide to a computer? It's electricity, right?
Okay. Okay.
At the
Yes.
end, if we start from the very beginning, like electricity is the most fundamental physical unit that you can provide as an input to a computer, right? So
Right.
like whenever we write any program or algorithm, this question must come into our mind, like when you are writing any syntax, like a print statement or a for loop or a if else condition, like how does the computer understands that, right? So because a computer, if you have to start building a computer from scratch today, you do not have any idea like where to start from. Just I'm trying to give you the imagination what the scientists who developed the computers on very first time, what the mindset they might have, like how they would have started building a programming language for the first time, right? So if they have electricity and they want to teach the computer how to think, because whatever we write, whatever we say to the computer, it's not going to understand, right? So at the end computer is only going to understand two things: whether the electricity is flowing through it or it is not flowing through it. Let's take the example of a bulb. If the electricity, like let's say it's an electron, if the electricity passes through the bulb, right, the bulb gets turned on, and in computer science we say that as one. And if the electricity does not flow, that means the bulb or the switch remains closed, and in that sense, in that case, we would represent that as zero. So this represents current not passing, and this represents the current passing. Okay, so now if we can make the computer understand these two things, right? Like now, let's say our next step is to make the computer learn how to count, because that's the first thing even we tend to learn into schools, right? So if we want the
Right.
computer to learn how to count, how would we go about doing that? Shubham, there is someone else who wants to learn. So let's say currently we have a bulb. It's just an arbitrary example. And as we saw that if the electricity is passing through it, we would represent that as one, right? So, and let's say if the bulb is switched off, we would call it zero. Now, if we want to calculate higher than zero and one, how would we go about doing that? If you can give any insight, like what do you think we should do here?
Let's say you are talking about adding numbers like 2 plus
Yeah.
5 kind of.
Uh, yeah. Currently, we just want to represent numbers higher than zero and one. So right now we only have two numbers in our number system. How would we go about counting higher than this? Any?
Like like we have to show two
If
bulbs, like
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, which are switched on.
Okay. Let's say we have another bulb, and the second bulb is on. We are going to call this two, right? And in this case, the first bulb remains off, right? Now, again, if we want to calculate to three, like, what do you guys think we should do?
then if we go with the same logic, I guess we'll have 3 on bulbs.
We can do that, but if we try to be a little smarter, like, because we already have one bulb here, which is currently switched off. So if we try to combine these two bulbs, we can say that if we turn on the one bulb that we started with, we can say that that was one, and now the second bulb was two. So if we add them, we can say we have the number three. We can represent number three here, right? Similarly, let's say I add another bulb here. Guys, it's just a vague example right now, but we'll see how this turns out into binary systems pretty soon. Moon, can you just tell like how would we represent number four here?
2 plus 1, 3.
Okay, let me tell you this. If the third bulb switches on, we would represent that as 4, and the other two bulbs would remain switched off, right? Can anyone tell like how would we count number 5 here? You guys can comment in the chat as well, and if you want to tell anyway, how would we go on counting number 5?
We turn on
I'm not
the
getting
bulb.
it. If we turn on a bulb, we called it 1, and if it's off, we call it 0. Then why
Yeah.
we called in the second row 2 plus 1? The second one is on, is 1. Okay, the first one,
Yeah.
why we gave it 2?
No,
Yeah,
this
exactly.
represents number 3. Like 2. Okay. So if I understood it correctly, your question is if you want to represent number 2, why is this bulb on, right? Is this
No,
your
no.
question?
No, no, no.
I understand that if the bulb is on, we
Yeah.
called it 1. But why the second one, the which you are assigning number 2? Why we are assigning 2 to it? Why not 1
Okay.
only? 1 plus 1
Got
then
it.
2.
Yeah, got it. So we have studied the decimal system, right? In our elementary classes
Right.
in nursery and all. So if we
Yes.
can recall it, when we started decimal system, we learned that this we start always counting from the zeros place, or not zeros place. We call it the ones place, right? Then the second digit is assigned to the tens place.
Yes, yes.
Third digit is
Then
assigned
100
to the
and then
hundreds,
1000.
right? And then thousand and then so on, right? So
Got it.
if we want to generate like, because this is the base 10, right? We are talking about decimal system is base 10. Why base 10? Because in every position we have 10 possibilities from 0 to 9. We can fill anything between 0 to 9 in every position, right? So again, we have
Yes.
10 possibilities to fill here, then 10 possibilities to fill here. So even if you have any doubt right now, let me give you an example. Let's start with number 123, right? In like
Okay.
from our back of mind, we can very quickly say that this is number 123.
100 plus 20 plus 3. Yes.
Yeah. That's all it is. 100 plus 20 plus 3. And if you break it down, like the ones place, we can say 10 to the power 0. Tens place, we can say 10 to the power 1. Hundreds place, we can say 10 to the power 2, and so on. So the same thing we have to do into the binary system, right? But here in binary system, like I said, computer only understand two things: whether electricity is passing through the bulb or the electricity is not passing through the bulb. So in every position, we only have two possibilities: whether the electricity is passing or whether the electricity is not passing. So instead of 10, what we would do, we would say this is at one's place, we would say it's 2 to the power 0 because we have only two possibilities. In the second position, we would say 2 to the power 1, right? And in the third position, we would say 2 to the power 2. So
Okay.
like starting like following this concept, if you apply that here, you would see that this position is 2 to the power 1 would give us 2. That's why we have put 2 here and not 1. And that's why, because this is 2 to the power 2, so that's why we have put 4 here. We are trying to establish a number system. We are creating a binary number system. Because this is base 2, we are taking the powers of 2 instead of powers of 10. Sorry, this is
Okay.
not
Got it.
uh,
Now I understood it.
this is not 100 to the power 2, this is 10 to the power 2.
So in normal our decimal system, we take base of 10, as you said. And now here in binary system, as we have only two options to put up at a place, we are using base 2. So that's why 2 to power 0, 2 to power 1, and
Yeah,
2 to power 2.
yeah.
As we
In
follow.
every position, we only have two possibilities to fill. That's why we are taking only base 2. Right, and where did we came from only two possibilities? Like we said that a computer only understands two things: whether electricity is passing through it or whether it is not passing through it. That's why we only have two possibilities on every single position. Okay, so after 4, like where were we? We were talking about like how would we go about counting to number 5. So if you guys see, yeah, please go on if you have any answer.
No, I've got it now. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so do you guys agree that if we turn the rightmost bulb, which represents 1, we can count to
1.
5, right? 4 plus 1,
Right.
and that would give us 5. If we have to calculate now, let's say number 6 after 5, what would we do?
Okay. 6. Then this 4 and 1, as you said, are the first bulb
Yeah.
on.
No, not the first bulb.
And
You
if
would
you
turn the
okay,
second
then
bulb on.
we'll turn off the first bulb and turn on the second one. 4 plus 2.
No, second and third bulb. Yeah, you are getting it right. The rightmost bulb would we would switch this bulb off now,
Yeah.
right? And we would turn off this bulb, which represents 2. So this would give us 7. Oh, sorry,
Right.
6. Right? 4 plus 2
6.
equals to 6. If now after 6 we want to calculate to 7, so we would turn this bulb on again, and this would give us 7, right?
7.
Yeah. So you see that
Okay.
just with 3 bulbs we can count up to 7 if we try combination of different bulbs, right? Similarly, let's go to the next slide. If we want to count let's say number 8, because like if you see, we have consumed all the 3 bulbs here and we can only count up to number 7, right? Now we want to count to 8.
Yes.
What should we do now, in your understanding? we had 3 bulbs and we consumed all 3 of them.
Then I guess we need to introduce a new bulb.
Yeah, definitely. Uh,
2 to the power 3.
yeah, 2 to the power 3, and this would represent 8, the number 8 in binary system. And if we turn this bulb on, this would give us 9. And if we want to calculate 10, can you tell me, like, how can we do that? How can we calculate 10?
Okay, 8, and the second bulb would be on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
the
definitely.
Second from
fourth
the
and
right.
second bulb.
Yeah, right. Okay, and now you guys can, like, if you want to try, can you guys tell me, like, with all the 4 bulbs on, how high, how high we can count if we are given these 4 bulbs?
15.
Yeah, 15. With
15, yeah.
with 4 bulbs, we can count up to 15. So this would be 4 and this would be 1 if we turn these bulbs on as well. So, like, you guys know, you guys must have heard about bits, right? This is nothing but in computer science, every position or this every bulb, we call that a bit. And do you guys
Okay.
know, like, how many bits do we have in 1 byte?
1024. No,
No, in 1 byte.
Bits.
Yeah, 8
in 1
bits.
byte.
8 bits, right?
8 bits. Yeah.
In 1 byte, you would have 8 bits. So, like, 4 more on this side. Okay. So,
Okay.
like, combined these 8 bits, we would call that 1 byte. So, like, guys, right now we are only talking about bulbs. Like, do you guys know why we are talking about bulbs instead of, like, because
I think we are trying to figure out how we write basic and normal numbers in binary system, like 0 or 1.
Because right now you guys might be thinking that I'm using the example of bulb and you guys might find it quite vague, but you guys must have heard about this ENIAC, right? This is the very first computer, very first computational computer that was built, and like in this computer, the scientists actually used electrical bulbs to store memory and to represent these numbers. And this computer actually took up like an entire room space, and it waited to be about like, if I'm right, about 3 tons or something. So yeah, so definitely this is an drawback. Like, this is a limitation. We cannot continue like this. So like, you guys might have heard about transistors, right? Nowadays
Right.
we have transistors instead of bulbs. The basics are quite similar. If I talk about a transistor consists of 3 things. It would have a source, a gate, and a drain, right? Let's call this drain. This is the source, and let's call it the gate. So the principle is fundamentally still same here. Electrons are passing through a gate. In previous example, we were talking about the electric bulb. So if electrons pass through the bulb gets turned on, and we were calling that 1. Here, if the electrons get passed through this gate, we would call that 1. And if the gate remains closed and electron is not passing through it, we would call that 0. And just to give a perspective, earlier in ENIAC, when we started, like, in a computer of the size of an entire room, we had about 18,000 light bulbs. In today's scenario, single chip of about 2 to 3 centimeters contains about 2 billion of such transistors. That's why we are able to do all these things, like play like heavy games and all these things, and running multiple applications at the same time. If we still had that limitation, we won't be able to do all these things, right? Yeah. So let's just do a couple of examples. I had a couple of examples written. Yeah. Can you guys convert 65 to binary, like into binary? If I tell you guys to convert 65 into binary, can you guys
Yes,
do that?
I'll try this.
Yeah. Yeah. Like also, guys, I just want to say that it would be fruitful if you guys sit with a pen and register if you want to. But if you don't have, that's also fine.
I guess we'll need 6 bulbs now.
6 bulbs. Yeah, you can try on. All you have to give me like the ones and zeros representation of 65.
Okay, just
Yeah.
1000001.
How many zeros?
Oh, my bad. It's 2 to the power 6. Just a second. 2 to the power 6 would be there. Would be 1, then 5 zeros and then 1. Yeah, this time.
Okay, 5 zeros and then 1.
Yes.
5 zeros. Was it right?
3, 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first, the 2 to the power 7 will be 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this gives us, sorry. 1, this gives us 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and 128, right? So yeah, right.
Yeah.
1, 5 zeros and then 1. So that is like the binary representation of 65. So I think you guys are capable of doing this. If you still have any doubt in converting decimals to binary, please.
I got this question in my college second sem. I never got it right. Not even if I was not able to make 16 or 17 now. But I have to say this, Devendra, this was the easiest way, and now I am getting it really good. I
Thanks,
guess
man.
I can do it now.
Great, man.
No one told me like explain it like this. The base 2 thing worked for me.
Yeah. Because that's actually the fundamental, right? That is how the binary system was created. Like Shubham, do you have any doubt? Or it's fine, we can move on. Okay, let's move on. So like we have represented numbers here, right? What do you guys think we should do if you want to represent alphabets? Because like earlier computers could work with just numbers because earlier computers were actually built for the purpose of computations only. Like if you guys see, the most earlier computers were built in the World War times, so their main purpose was to crack codes of like secret agencies and all that. That's why those things worked at that time. But in today's time, we have to represent so many things, right? Like alphabets and numbers and colors, pixels and videos and photographs and all that. So after number, if we want to represent any like letters, let's say A, how do you guys think we should do that? Like the principle would still remain the same. We would represent like A to a given number. So you guys can search this out after the session. Anyways, what this standard system does is like it's nothing else. It represents like it assigns a certain number to a specific character. So like A, like capital A would be 65, right? Capital B would be 66, and so on until capital Z, which is represented 90, is it? Yeah, capital Z is represented 90. You can also compute it like 65 plus 26 because there are 26 alphabets. Sorry, not 26, 25. 65 plus 25, that was also give you 90. Then we also want to represent some characters. So like dash.
Some special character.
Yeah, special characters. So dash, exclamation sign, question mark, they all have their, they all are assigned a particular number. So for example, let's just say dash is assigned 33, then this is assigned 34, 35, or this is not the correct one, but so numbers are assigned to them and they are standard everywhere. Similarly, like small a is given 97 and small z is given 122. Okay. So like the basics still remains same. We are only representing a particular number to these characters. And if you want to represent, uh, let's say we want to represent capital D in binary. So we don't have to think a lot about it because if capital A is 65, or like B would be 66, then C would be 67, and D would be 68. And now we have nothing more to do. We just simply convert 68 into binary like we did earlier, right? These things would come handy when we would do problems on like algorithm problems on binary systems and strings. But for now, if you guys understood it, we can move on, right?
Okay.
Any questions, guys, you can ask or message that into chat.
So the binary code will be 1001001 for D, right?
Yeah, right. One more thing is like we like what do you guys think we would like, how would we differentiate between capital A and actually representing number 65? Because we also want to use number 65 in some places and we also want to use A. So we cannot assign A to 65 because if 65 is assigned to A, we won't be able to use number 65. So like, what do you guys think is the answer here?
No idea.
Yeah, so definitely some our computers are smart enough. So that's like computer would look at what the application you are using. So if you are using, let's say Notepad, it's embedded in its system that in Notepad, the computer would take 65 and it would think that 65 is meant to be represented as capital A instead of 65. Like in contrary, if you have to use a calculator or a calculator application, then the computer would be smart enough to understand that this, like here we are actually talking about the number 65 and not the character A, right? So like definitely some deep computational sciences go into it, but we don't have to dive that deep into it right now. Just understand that based on like a text file, so also things like use like extension of a file also plays a role in it. So let's say you are working on Notepad and you save it uh, as a file. So like let's say demo.txt. So the computer would look at this extension and it would interpret it as characters instead of numbers. That's all that's going on here. Okay, so we have seen basically what the binary system is. So now, because if you guys see that whatever language you are writing your code in, that's still not in zeros and ones. So let's take an example. We have a statement saying print f and my name is Dev. This is still characters and we want to, like we have just studied that computer only understands zeros and ones, right? So what do you guys think, how do we do that? Like do you guys have any understanding of this, how the computer turns this our source code into zeros and ones?
Again, no idea.
Okay.
I guess if we assign printf a number itself, kind of.
Yeah, like in the most core way, that's what's happening. But we do not have to do that manually, and that what we are going to talk about right now. Like whatever languages that uh, we would we would have to deal as software engineers, right? So C or C++ or Java or like similar languages, Python, PHP, and whatever. These all languages, these programming languages, the code that you write in these languages is known as source code. And in order to convert this source code into the machine code, we need something known as a compiler. Okay, so so in order for the computer to understand our source code, we have to convert it into zeros and ones, and that job is done by either a compiler or an interpreter. So there are these two kinds of languages. First is known as compiled languages. And second type is interpreted languages. Right. So like now what's the difference? Both things are doing the same thing. They are converting our source code into machine code, right? But the difference lies in the way that these things are happening. So in a compiled language, what would a compiler would do? And like guys, compiler is nothing. It's just software that is already installed into your, like when you install Java, whenever you install any language, every language would have its own compiler. So Java would have a compiler dedicated for it. When you download the Java language onto your operating system, based on like which kind of machine you have. So like for a Windows machine, Java provides a different compiler opposed to a Mac machine or a Linux machine. So suppose we download Java on our machine. Okay, so let's not take the example of Java right now. Let's say we downloaded C into our machine, right? So it would come with its own compiler, and it would convert our source code. Like if you guys have ever written code into C, you would know that when we save a C code, the extension is .c. So let's say our file's name is hello, and in this file remains our source code, right? So if you want to run it, first of all, you would compile it into a bytecode. So, sorry, not a bytecode, into an executable file. So, and the compiler would generate a .object file. And another thing happens in between, which is it doesn't happen in many high level languages, but only in languages like C. There is one more software, I'm not remembering its name, but that at the end would convert it into a executable file. So like basically why we are having so many steps is because as humans we cannot write code actually into zeros and ones. So that's why scientists have developed like languages that are similar to English. So like that's why we have statements like print and all. And it is the computer's job to convert that into binary code so that the computer can understand that. So the compiler would convert your code into zeros and ones. You only have to deal with the source code. Like in your entire career, you would never have to deal with zeros and ones and like the object file and all. But uh, the understanding would like might help you guys. So this is the job of a compiler. Now, if we take the example of Python, let's say. Um, So Python does not come with a compiler, right? It has a interpreter. Again, let's not take the example of Python. We would because Python is done a little differently, and we'll talk about it. Let's take the example of JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript has an interpreter, and what the interpreter does is, like, it does not give you a separate file such as the .object or .exe file. Okay, so what JavaScript would do, if you run your code, it would line by line read your code. So let's say your file has a bunch of lines, bunch of code, right? What the interpreter would do, it would go line by line. So it would first read the first line, then the second line, then the third line, the fourth line, and line by line, it would convert that into the machine code. Instead of doing that all at once, interpreter would do it line by line. And by doing so, the execution time is a little slower in interpreted languages as compared to the compiled languages. That's why languages like C, C++, Java are like, these languages are preferred when you want very good performance from your code, from your applications. That's why you write like, these languages are still in demand, or so much in demand. And also in, like, in competitive programming, it is recommended that you choose one of the lower language level languages instead of languages like Python, JavaScript, or PHP, because all these languages are interpreted and the code is executed line by line.
So why there's a difference and not the same? Like we could use if
Yeah, I got
Python
it.
JS or PHP.
Yeah, like, so what you're trying to say is, if compiled languages tend to be faster, why do we have interpreted languages, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what happens is, if you write code into JavaScript, like in the coming lectures, you guys, like when Arpit to teach you about JavaScript, you would see that you guys are building web applications, and you need to build it in such a way that you have to see changes instantly. Like, you would see that on half of your screen you would be writing code, and on the other half of the screen, whatever the web page you are working on, that would keep on changing. So that can only happen in languages which are interpreted, because in interpreted languages, even if the execution is a little slower, development, like when you are developing a software, the whole process is not as slower. That tends to be quite faster. Why? Because you do not have to create a compiled file on each case, right? Because like in C and C++, what would happen is, you all, if even if you write a single lines code, you have to compile it first, and the compiler would give you a separate .exe and .object files. So every time, like, the development process would heavily suffer if you use these languages instead of the interpreted languages. That makes sense. uh,
Okay, so every time there's a change, it need to compile the whole file.
yeah,
So
and
that's why we are
yeah,
going with the interpreter. So
the development process tends to be a lot faster into interpreted languages as compared to the compiled languages. Yeah, and another very big point is, interpreted languages are platform.
sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm telling it. Interpreted languages are platform independent.
Oh.
So if you guys messed it up. So if you guys remember, like in the previous slides, I mentioned that every compiler, like every language has a different compiler for the platform that you are downloading the language on. So like Windows would, like if you download Java on Windows, sorry, not Java, C in on Windows, it would come with a different compiler. if you download C on like as compared to downloading C on a Linux platform or a Mac OS platform. So what happens on interpreted languages, since there is no role of like what's a compiler, right? So you do not need the compiler. That's why if you are writing a code on like say in JavaScript, you can run it on any platform. So in that way, the uh, like the development process and the applications built on these languages tend to be platform independent. Like application that you are building on say on a Windows platform, you can run it without any additional software on other platforms as well. That's actually the biggest advantage of interpreted languages. There is one more thing, actually I forgot to mention it. It's called the JIT, or just-in-time compilation. So like it's a very important question that is always, like not always, many times asked in like Python and Java programmers. Like, can you guys tell me like what kind of languages are these, Python and Java? Are they compiled languages or interpreted languages?
Interpreted.
Okay. Actually,
You wrote Java in compiled languages.
yeah, there is a big debate. Like these languages are neither compiled and nor interpreted, because the way they work is like let's say you download Java into your machine. Okay. So initially Java, what it would do is, like Python and Java are also platform independent. And you would like, because we all know that Java is one of the most core languages, and it is considered very fast as compared to the slower languages like JavaScript and Python, but it is still not completely compiled. So what happens is, when you download Java into your machine, it would first be compiled, we can say compiled into a bytecode, and it would, like when you write code in Java, let's say you write code in Java, so it is saved as .java extension. Let's say this is the file that you wrote your code in. What Java does is it first like compiles it into a bytecode and gives you a intermediary file, that's known as .class files. Now, since this is not completely machine code and neither it's the source code, what is the advantage of creating it, right? So again, like since Java is like the developers of Java wanted to keep it platform independent, so that's why they have introduced this concept of bytecode. So instead of completely keeping it a compiled language or an interpreted language, we came up with an intermediary languages like a bytecode. So you can develop a Java program on any language, on any platform that you wish. So if you are working on a Windows platform, you can make your entire application on that platform and convert and like make sorry not compile it into a bytecode. And in order to keep it platform independent, you can run that application on any other platform, but that platform would use the concept of just-in-time compilation. So you would have this bytecode, and now you want to execute it on a different platform. So what you would do is, with the help of the just-in-time compilation, in the second process, the Java code would be interpreted. And finally, it would be converted into an executable file. So just because we want to, we wanted to keep languages like Java and Python platform independent. That's why there's this concept of just-in-time compilation. What it does is it does not interpret your code line by line. Let me. So let's say this is your bytecode. So what was happening initially was like in JavaScript and other languages, like in purely interpreted languages, the code was executed line by line. And when the compiler gets the first line and it is converting it into zeros and ones, the compiler is sitting idle and not doing anything in that period of time. So that is actually considered a waste of time, because uh, this all the other lines are not getting used, right? So when it comes to the second line, let's say now it is converting that into zeros and ones, then again the compiler has to wait until it finishes converting this line. So to overcome this problem, uh, what scientists did is they came up with just-in-time compilation. So what happens is in just-in-time compilation, suppose this is your bytecode. So when the compiler is, sorry, not the compiler, when the interpreter is converting the first line into zeros and ones, the interpreter is not sitting idle. In that time, what it is doing is, it is also like when it is converting this, it is simultaneously also taking this second line and it is storing this into a temporary memory. Okay, so as soon as this line is converted, the interpreter does not have to wait, because it can take the code from this temporary memory and it can keep on going without waiting for the next lines. So that is basically the concept of just-in-time compilation. And this is followed in languages like Java and Python. And this also makes these languages as platform independent. I'm sure their concepts are a little tough to understand. So if you guys have still any doubt,
I,
you guys can ask.
I guess I have instituted some. I'm not very sure about the JIT, but got everything very clear.
So like
If once I'll read it on my own, I can clear it.
yeah, sure. So just let me try to explain in this way. Just-in-time compilation, what it does is, like, it is exactly like the interpreted languages, but what's happening in the interpreted languages is the lines that the interpreter is converting into the machine code. Until this first line is completely converted, the interpreter is sitting idle, right? It is not doing anything productive in that period of time. So that, since that is a huge wastage of time, just-in-time compilation is doing the same thing, but it is also not sitting idle when a single line is getting converted into machine codes. It is simultaneously also converting these other lines and storing it into a temporary memory. And then if as soon as you finish converting the first line, you would take the code that you have already stored in the temporary memory, and basically the whole process gets a little faster. That's all. I would share the links of the sources, so sure you guys can go through that.
Yeah, sure. I would love to.
Okay, so we have talked about compiled, interpreted, and just-in-time compilation. Now let's talk about Programming constructs. Basically, what these programming constructs tells us, it's every programming language that you would write your code in would consist of these same building blocks. So you can also call it as building blocks of any programming language. uh, First thing is the flow. Second is the selection. And the third thing is iteration. Flow is also known as sequence. So what do we understand by sequence? Whatever programming language that you guys would write your code in would always follow a fixed sequence. So let's say we are writing in Java. So it would always read the code from left to right and from top to bottom. Every programming languages always follow this sequence when it is executing the code, right? Second thing is selection. So we would be shortly seeing about the if and else conditions, but selection is basically like diverting your code based on some conditions. So it defines the path chosen by your code. So if you guys have coded before, you would sure be familiar with the if else conditions, right?
Yes.
If not, don't
Yeah.
worry, we'll be talking about this. So that's all about selection. So if a condition matches, your code would run according to that. If that condition is not matched, a different path would be taken by your code, right? So that is selection. And the third thing is iterations. So guys, these are actually all the things that are common in all the programming languages. So iteration, like there are two type of iterations. One is count. Counter based iterations. Second are condition based iterations. So counter based iteration would be an example would be a for loop. So for, let's say, I starting from I equals to 0, I less than 10, then I plus plus. Don't worry, we would be going through these things in this session only. So if you see that iteration is nothing but a loop. So you want to run a single command a multiple number of times. So let me start with a new slide. Like guys, are we comfortable with loops? Like, do you guys understand what a loop is?
Yeah.
Basic idea. Yeah. I have
Okay.
wrote some programs using for loop and the if.
Okay. So a loop is like suppose you want to print a line, print hello world. You want to print it 10 times, right? This is the goal of your program. Instead of writing the same line 10 times, we run a for loop. We initiate a variable to 0, and then we say s like as long as I is less than 10, we keep on running this loop, and as soon as I reaches to 10, we would stop running this loop. And in this loop, we are repeating the same code 10 times. So that's basically what a for loop is. And this is a counter based loop. That means we have a fixed number of times that we want to run this loop. The second kind of loop is a while loop or a do while loop. This loop is a condition based loop. So let's say as long as age is less than 15, we want to run some code. Let's say print minor. So since this loop is running based on a condition, this is known as a condition based loop or a condition based iteration, while the previous one is a for loop. Right? I think we cannot exceed 20 slides.
Oh, is it in the Zoom itself?
Yeah. So these were the three things. Like every programming language has to follow a sequence. There are some selections like if and else statements that are common in every language, every logic based language, and the last thing was iterations. So if these things are clear, I think we can move to variables.
Yeah.
Yes, we can go ahead.
Variables like are actually placeholders for storing data. You want to store the data into a memory uh, in your RAM. So that's how would you go on doing that? Let's say we want to write a code for calculating the area of a circle. Okay, so how would we start doing that? We first need to create a variable for the radius because we know the formula of the area of radius or area of a circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pi r square. Now, since we need, like, what do you guys think? How many variables we would be needing in this program to calculate the radius of a variable of a circle?
Just
Two, I guess, one for the
variable.
radius and one for the area.
Yeah. So I'm taking the example of JavaScript. In JavaScript, when you have to define a variable, you have to write this keyword var. So guys, like keywords are the terms that are already used by the programming languages. So you cannot freely use these keywords for in place of the name of a variable. So if you have to choose, I'll just give you the syntax. When defining a variable, you would first write var and then the name of the variable. So let's say, and this name could be anything. Let's say first we are making the variable for area, and we initialize it to 0, or let's not initialize it. Let's say we are just declaring this variable area right now, but we can choose any name for this variable instead of some pre-reserved names like var. If you use var in place of the name of this variable, it would give you an error. Similarly, like you cannot use for in place of a name of any variable. So these are some reserved keywords that you cannot use. Okay, so for this, again coming to this example, we created the first variable area, second variable you would need is radius. Again, just declaring it. Guys, we still need one more variable, which is, let's say, pi. And let's give it a value of 3.14 because we know that pi is always equals to 3.14. Okay, so like you guys can see, we actually use 3 variables in this code, and now in order to calculate the area, we would like assign this variable area equals to pi into radius to the power 2.
Can't we
So
just use 3.14 while calculating the area
yeah,
instead of
yeah,
declaring it as a separate variable?
yeah, sure, you can do that. So that's why. Sorry. Yeah, again coming to your point, like we can use 3.14, and the reason why I wrote it, like I declared it as a separate variable, is because I wanted to talk about constants. So if we go back to that code, we had a variable known as area. Initially, we just declared it, and second variable was radius.
Third variable, like because I wanted to talk about constants, there are two concepts. One is a variable and one is a constant. So instead of writing pi as a variable, we know that the value of pi would never change, right? Because it's a constant. So there is another concept which is known as constant. So instead of defining pi as a variable, you would define it as a constant. And finally, area equals to pi into r square. And the reason why we are doing it like this, the reason why we are defining pi as a constant is, let's say someone else reads your code in future and he doesn't understand that the value of pi remains like has to remain a constant. So he can, if you define pi as a variable, he can change this value later on in the code. Let's say after calculating the area, we change the value of pi to 3.24, and the code would still run fine. It would not give any errors. But if you know that the variable that you are defining is a constant, and you define it as a constant, then now if someone tends to change its value, your program would throw an error saying that pi is a constant and you cannot change its value. So that's the difference between a variable and a Python, or a variable and a constant. If you know that your variable is not going to change and it is constant, it is a good practice to write it as a constant. Yeah, one more thing, like Arpit won't be taking the JS session today, so you guys can stretch this session a little longer because we still have to cover functions and statements. So what is a function?
Yeah, sure.
Like anyone want to tell what
I would say number of like group of action, I would say.
yeah, definitely. So uh, let's say this area program that we wrote, right, to calculate the area of a circle. Suppose you are building um, a website where your goal is to teach people about the mathematical functions of geometry, right? So instead of using these lines of codes again and again, if you know that you have a fixed functionality, So you can create functions for a group of code, and you can group your code into a single function. So let me give you an example. In JavaScript, what you can do is you can create a function known as certain. Also, guys, you can name your functions anything that you want. Circle underscore area. Let's say this is your function's name, and this function is accepting some arguments. We will talk about the arguments, what these arguments are. And now in this function, you can write your code. And if you create a function, so let me quickly write the code. This is your code, right? Now, suppose you want to take the input from the user. Let's say you are building an application. So in that application, what is the one thing that would change in this function? It would be radius, right? So in this argument, what you can do is you can ask from the user to pass a radius argument into your function, and then whatever it is passed into this function, that would replace this radius here.
So if we need an input, we can just use it that in bracket, and then
Yeah.
below
So,
we'll have to define all the variables.
let's say as pi, you already know it's a constant, you know its value, so you don't need its value from the user. And area, because you want to calculate it, use like that's the goal of the program. So definitely you would not ask the user for that. The user would only give you the radius. So because the user wants to know what is the area of a circle whose radius is say 2 centimeter. So since this is a variable that is that needs to be given, like that is different for every circle, so this is passed as an argument. So let's say we have defined the function circle area. You have written the code, some lines are there, and now if you want to call this function, you do not have to write this function again. All you have to do is call the name of this function. Wherever you want to call this function in your program, you have to just call it, and when you are calling it, at that time you would pass the value of the variable that you want here. So let's say now you want to find the radius of a circle, area of a circle whose radius is 5 centimeter. So you would write 5 here, right? And in this code, since you have passed 5, so in place of radius, this value would be passed here in place of radius, and this circle would return the value of, oh sorry, I think I also forgot the return statement, right? So when we wrote the code before, every function, if it's returning a value, since we are returning the value of the area, so we have to write a return statement. So as we wrote before, area equals to pi r square. I'm just writing it like this. So this function would return the area. So whenever you call this function, wherever in your code you would call this function, it would calculate the value of area based on the parameters that you guys have passed here, and it would return the value of the area. Okay. I think we also skipped over like the data types. So let me quickly go through that as well. When we talked about variables, like guys, do you know about loosely typed languages and strictly typed languages? Anyone? Okay, so what happens is loosely typed languages in strictly typed languages like C, Java, C, C++, and all, you have to define the type of variable that you are defining. So if you have to define a variable in Java, what you would do is you would write the type of the variable. So suppose in our previous example, we declared the variable radius, right? So we know that the value of radius, let's not take radius. Let's first take, let's say you want to store someone's age in a variable. So you would store the age into a integer. There are different data types based on the data that you want to store in a variable. So let's say this is the name of the variable and this is the data type of that variable, integer. And you would only pass an integer in this variable. Okay. Let's say second, you want to store someone's name. So for storing names, we have a different data type that is of type string. And depending on the language, most of the time you have to write a string in enclosed in double quotes. So let's say these. So like these things are known as data types. Data types, as the name suggests, it represents the type of data that you are storing in your variable. So in the name variable, since you are storing a string, string is nothing but characters. Okay, so that's string. In age, you are storing integer, so that's why the data type is int. Also, like in the previous example, you are storing radius. So radius can be in decimal points. So for that decimal points, we have the data type float. That's a 9.05. Okay, so in a strictly typed language, you have to define the data types for the variable that you are defining. You have to define, you have to mention the data type in front of the variable name. But in loosely typed languages like JavaScript, PHP, Python, what these languages did is like the creator of JavaScript thought that it is a little harder for beginners to understand these data types. So he made his language a little smarter. So you can define or declare any variable without defining the data type or without worrying about the data type. So suppose you are defining a variable age, and you can store anything in this variable. So right now we are storing integer. Somewhere along in our code in future, if you want to change the type of data that you are storing, suppose you store, instead of 9, you store the value 9, okay, the string 9. So in loosely typed languages, this would not throw any error. But if you do the same thing in a strictly typed language, if you change, like if you have mentioned earlier that age is of type integer, and if in future in your code, if you try to change its value into string, it would throw an error. What else? So that is also a problem in loosely typed languages, because it can result into a very messy code. So if someone else reads your code and change something in it, your code would not throw any error. But logically, it would not be right and it should throw an error. So that's the main difference into strictly typed languages and loosely typed languages, and these are the data types. I would share the resources with you guys. There are a lot more data types. Mm. I think data types are also done. Like guys, if you have any questions, please throw it in.
Not really.
So I think
I guess
has posted into the chat.
yeah.
Mapta, can you
CAD, decibel, and double.
unmute yourself and ask the question? I'm having trouble understanding what you want to. Mohammed, sorry. If you have any question, you can unmute yourself. Yeah. I think what you're trying to ask is whether it would return in console, right? So in case of JavaScript, yeah, it would return into console, but I have written this code like the return area. No, it would not return into console. So in JavaScript, you must know that there is console.log, right? We do console logging. So if Mafta, can you hear me? Mohammed.
No, you're not audible.
Are you guys not able to understand me or hear me?
Hello?
No. Your voice is loud.
Okay. Yeah, so
Hello, do you hear me, guys?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I was having something wrong with my microphone. This is why I was muted.
Okay. No worries, man. Yeah, what was your question?
I just have a question like for JavaScript, because I was used to use C#,
Okay.
so it is not so it is strict. This is why I wrote like the data type. But my question is like for JavaScript, we don't need to define the data type, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in JavaScript, did I wrote the JavaScript code? No, those things are gone. So in JavaScript, like in previous slides, I mentioned that you only have to write var or lat or const. These are the three things. Let's not get confused with lat and const. We would be studying them in future. But in order
Okay.
to define a variable, you do not have to worry about the data type. You can, but you have to write var in front of your variable whenever you are declaring it. So var radius equals to 5. And now if you want to use it, you do not have to write var again anywhere in the code.
Okay, I get the idea.
And I think you were also asking about console log. Is that doubt clear now?
Yes, I was asking for the console log. So if we write this function, for example, is it going to like, and we add like the return statement, return area, it will show up in the console, right? We don't need to like to write console.log.
No, it would not. So in order to write anything into console log, you would always have to write console.log. And now console.log accepts parameters. In these parameters, you can, let me erase this. If you want to console log the value that this function is returning, you can pass it this function. You can call this function in console.log. So
Okay, I see.
circle area and just pass the radius. Now it would log into the console.
Okay, and it will return the area, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So, like,
thank you for the explanation.
so guys, have you all installed VS Code into your machines? Like, have you tested it?
Yes, I have wrote the assignment last time Arpit gave us in VS Code.
So, like, also Shubham, like, have you downloaded VS Code into your machine?
Yes, I do.
Shubham, can you hear us? Okay, so the reason why I'm asking is because of this is the last introductory session. From the next session, we would be diving straight into coding. We would be solving problems on data structures and algorithms. So that's why like you guys are needed to have VS Code or any other editor installed in your machine. So like you guys can write code.
Okay, are we going to like to start building projects live? Live?
Project? No. We would not directly start from projects. Initially, we would start from data structures and algorithms, and we would be doing some problem solvings on some lead code programs, on some lead code problems. And once you guys are aware, like, of all the syntax of JavaScript, which classes Arpit would be taking, and uh, some basic things like arrays, because we have to know these basic data structures like arrays, linked list, and trees. Like, you do not have to know these to write web development, but if you are able to write arrays and solve some problems, then we can jump into projects. So I think after
I
1
see.
month, I think we would be jumping into projects.
So we need to like to know a lot about ELL entries because I didn't have much knowledge about them. I am just used to array.
Okay. Yeah, most of the things when you are only dealing with web development, I think arrays would be enough for most of the things. But if you want to go anywhere beyond web development, then definitely other data structures would be required. And in order to crack coding interviews, definitely other data structures are must.
Okay, I see. So are they necessary for game development, do you think? Like, have you familiar with?
Yeah, I would say for game development, things like trees would come definitely handy because if you have done image processing, there are things like annotations, image annotations and all, and pixel annotations. If you know about them, then doing those things like programming in that environment, definitely array would not be sufficient for that.
Okay, I see. So now for just web development, I need to be familiar just with the data type array. Is it enough for me, right?
Yeah, I think array would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Like, guys, do we have any doubt in functions and variables? Any doubts at all?
No, looks good to me. Not really for now. I guess once we revise this, if we stumble on some questions, we'll definitely ask you.
Okay, so I think that's enough for today's session. We still had to cover some more things like conditionals and for loops. So, like we can take another intro class tomorrow if you guys want to cover it, like for loops and if and else statements. And if you guys can do that on your own, then we can directly jump into data structure and in problem solving from next class.
I guess
For me, okay, go ahead.
yeah, I was saying if you just can just share the resources, I'll try. I guess we can try to understand it on our own, and if we have any doubts, we'll ask you.
Yeah, that can work. Like Shubham, do you have like? Can you?
For me, I'm familiar with the like for loops and statements, so I didn't have any problem with that. So we can jump exactly to problem solving. But for the others, I think it would be sufficient like to start with the for loop because it's necessary for them.
Yeah. So, Shubham, are you able to hear me? Like Shubham or Shantanu? Like who is it? Cannot understand. Uh, okay, so I would share the links for the resources of like for loops. There are also some uh, like I don't know if you guys are aware with break, continue statements. Okay, so if you guys still want to know these things, we can also keep a class tomorrow morning, and then from tomorrow evening we can start directly from problem solving, if that's fine. Anyone who is already familiar with these things,
Works for me.
you can start from tomorrow evening, and if someone wants, you can join the tomorrow morning session.
Yeah, I would love to join morning too.
Okay, great. So
Okay, it would be a great idea. Okay, to join just to like to have some familiarity with it because I think break and continue like it's a little bit different from C#. So I need to see in practice how it looks like in JavaScript.
okay, so great. Like, is 11 o'clock tomorrow morning is it good with you guys? 11 p.m. tomorrow morning. Like Mohammed, you can.
Yeah, 11 a.m. right? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 11 a.m. If you can convert it into your time and let us know right now, like, would it be all right for you to join this session, Mohammed?
Okay, it's for me 18:30 p.m. So I think tomorrow is Sunday, so I will be available for that time.
Okay.
It would be 6 p.m. or what's the time there right now?
Yeah, man.
Yes, yes.
So what's the time there right now?
Okay, so I would schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Anyone who wants to join this, you can. And tomorrow evening's schedule would be same as today's, like 9 p.m. If you guys still have any questions in today's session, you guys can ask. Otherwise, this session is almost over.
Thank you so much for the session. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, guys, this session is recorded and we would be uploading these sessions on YouTube. So if anyone missed anything, you guys can see there, and I would be sharing the resources with you guys right after this class. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the session. Bye bye.